All right, U.S. history students, today we're going to focus on World War I. It's also called the Great War. We're going to be talking about why did it start and why did the United States get involved. All right, when we look at the causes of World War I, this is before the United States is involved, the way we can remember the four main causes is by using the word main, M-A-I-N. And so this gives us four causes. The first cause, militarism. There's a huge buildup of military personnel, and having a strong military is common practice in most European nations, and they're ready to use their strong militaries to defend themselves, to take new territory, and to fight enemies. The second, the A, is alliances. Many European nations are creating alliances with each other, and the goal is to avoid war. If they can have friends that can back them up, they feel like they might not get into a struggle or a fight. But what ends up happening is two countries start fighting, and everyone else has to get involved because of their alliances, because they're entangled with each other diplomatically. All right? And then the third one is imperialism. We've talked about imperialism, and this is these strong European nations are looking around the globe to try to take new territory, take as much territory as possible, and they're competing against each other. They're fighting for territory in Africa and Latin America, around the world. And then the fourth one is nationalism, and this is just the belief that your country is great, intense pride, and so this causes competition, it causes a power struggle, and it leads these European countries to fight each other. And so these are the four main causes of World War I. Here's the causes of World War I again. If you want to take a deeper look at these four, you can go ahead and pause the video now. Okay, so World War I begins. Europe is inflamed in war, and America over on our side of the ocean is sitting back, and we have Woodrow Wilson as the president. And he says, you know what, we're not going to get involved in this. We don't want to send our boys to go fight in a foreign war that we have nothing to do with. And we have a tradition that backs that up. There's an American tradition of staying out of European affairs. We want to maintain economic ties with both sides. We want to trade with both sides. We want to make money off of both sides. So Wilson announces in his Proclamation of Neutrality in 1914 that we are not going to get involved in this war, and we're going to try to remain neutral. So the goal of the United States at first is to remain neutral. Even though it is the goal of the United States to remain neutral, the U.S. does get pulled into the war, and let's look at some of the circumstances that pulls the United States into war. Even though the United States wants to remain neutral, we do have a closer tie with the Allied side of the war, with the British. Many Americans felt close to the British. We have a lot of ancestral ties to the British. We share a common language of English. We have a very similar legal system. We both have democracies and economic ties, which is probably the biggest tie, is with the Allies. Another reason why the U.S. gets pulled into this, gets involved, is we are being fed a lot of propaganda that is anti-German. Now, the British had basically cut off communication between the U.S. and other parts of Europe. So we were just being able to communicate with mainly Britain. And so they were feeding a lot of propaganda of anti-German stuff to the United States. One of the big things that angered a lot of Americans is Germany attacking Belgium. Belgium had taken a neutral stance. They didn't want to get involved in the fighting. And Germany attacked them on their way to attacking France. And so here's a political cartoon from the time. You can see the Belgium, no, you can't come through, but here's the big German bully coming through. And over here, remember Belgium. This is a German soldier, taking away a Belgian girl. And so a lot of Americans are becoming angered at Germany. The next reason why the United States gets pulled in is something called the Zimmermann Telegram. The Zimmermann Telegram was a telegram from Germany to Mexico, in which Germany approached Mexico to try to gain an alliance with Mexico to attack the United States. And so the Germans, they said, hey, Mexico, if you will become an ally with us, help us take on the United States. Whenever we defeat the United States, we will give you back your former lands that were taken from you by the United States. And so the British intercepted this. They gave it to the Americans. The American newspapers got a hold of it. The American newspapers printed it, and Americans all over the country read this letter and were enraged at the Germans. Here's a political cartoon of the Zimmerman telegram. So you've got the German, so he kind of looks like the devil, and you've got him talking to a Mexican person here, and he says, look, you can have back these parts of the United States that were taken from you. Here is the Zimmerman telegram. If you want to read it, you can go ahead and pause and read that. Another reason why the United States got involved in World War I is to protect freedom of the seas. This is what Wilson said. He says the Germans are not allowing freedom of the seas. American ships are being attacked, and so we're going to have to get involved. Now, this all started with the British. The British blockaded Germany. They're trying to starve them out. They're not allowing food or weapons to enter Germany, and so Germany does what they have to do, and they give out the German Proclamation of 1915, which this says that any waters around the British Isles are considered an official war zone. Britain is trying to starve us out, and we've got to take out these ships that are trying to blockade us. So we're gonna sink any ship that's in this area. And we're going to call this unrestricted submarine warfare. They were using these submarines to go and attack naval vessels, merchant vessels, any vessels that were coming into the British Isles. So they were sinking enemy ships and neutral merchant ships, which American neutral ships were under attack, under fire. And so President Wilson obviously doesn't like this, and so he says we're going to have to get involved to protect freedom of the open seas. Here's a map depicting kind of that blockade area. So here's the British blockade, not allowing anything into Germany. And so Germany in response says, all right, fine, we're going to call this a war zone, and we're going to, with our submarines, sink any ship that comes into this zone. Merchant ships, neutral ships, and enemy ships. So because of the Germans' unrestricted submarine warfare, they torpedoed a British ocean liner called the Lusitania, which 128 Americans died. This was May 1915. So Americans are outraged, and then in March of 1916, the Sussex is sunk. Okay, so the Germans are sinking these passenger ships, these neutral ships, and so this enrages Americans. This is what the Germans were using to sink these ships. It's called a U-boat or a submarine. And this was the advanced technology of the day. The Germans, they were not powerful on top of the water, but they were powerful with their submarines under the water. So after the Lusitania and Sussex are sunk, President Wilson goes to Germany and says, hey, listen up. If you guys don't stop sinking passenger ships and unarmed ships and neutral ships, then we're going to have to get involved, and we're going to fight against you. And so the Germans wanted to hold the Americans out of the war as long as possible. I mean, they felt like it was inevitable, but they wanted to hold out the Americans as long as possible. And so the Germans issue what's called the Sussex Pledge, where basically they pledged not to sink merchant ships without warning or aiding the passengers. And so they make this pledge to try to keep the U.S. out, but they ended up not upholding this pledge. And in January 1917, Germany announces that, hey, we are going to go unrestricted submarine warfare again. The British are starving us out. We're going to lose this war. We're going to have to attack any and every boat that comes into the war zone. And so they resume U-boat attacks. U.S. ships are attacked. Diplomacy fails. Wilson tries to get the Germans back on board to stop sinking U.S. ships, but they won't. And so this is going to lead to the United States getting into the war to protect freedom of the open seas, to protect American vessels and neutral ships passing through the war zone. Okay, here is a little graphic organizer where you can see the different things that pull the United States into war. So number one, Woodrow Wilson says we're going to make the world safe for democracy. We've got to keep these countries that are undemocratic from ruling the world. We have close ties with the Allies, with the British and the French. We're only getting the British and the Allied propaganda. We're not getting the whole story. And then German policies of unrestricted submarine warfare, the Zimmermann Note, and fear of the Germans and their large military are all going to pull the United States into World War I. President Wilson holds out of declaring war for as long as possible. He was in the middle of an election campaign, so he's in the election in 1916, and he says, hey, we're not going to go to war, we're not going to go to war, I'm keeping us out of war. And one of his slogans was, Woodrow Wilson, he kept us out of war. And so he goes as long as he can without declaring war, and then finally he's elected in 1916, and his term begins in March of 1917, and on April 2nd of 1917, finally enough is enough. He goes to Congress, and he asks Congress to declare war on Germany to make the world safe for democracy.